less than 2 months after a horrible murder, Reverend F.W. Stacy preached a sermon to his struggling congregation called When Fear Grips the Heart, and here's part of that sermon. In the wake of the Germond murder, there has come a wave of fear which has swept the entire community and gripped the hearts of all of us. During the past few days, the kind of tragedy has taken place which makes us reel with horror. It is too dastardly for us even to begin to comprehend it. At the mention of it, the soul shudders. 4 persons were murdered without cause so far as we know, and with horrible cruelty and brutality. The crime was committed in a Christian community, in the quiet of the countryside and in the peace of a farm home. In our community, a man roams with hands red with blood and stained with murder. Is a thought horrible to contemplate. Doors are now locked in our county that were left carelessly unfastened before the murder took place. And the first question in the morning is, have you seen the paper? Some folks are mighty fine Christians when the sea is smooth, but as soon as a storm blows up, they lose their faith. Friends, be steadied by your faith in Jesus.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes. It's almost Thanksgiving.
Yay.
That's exciting. And unfortunately, this is unsolved. I just decided to do it anyway because it happened on Thanksgiving and it's a historical case. We can try to decide who we think the killer is.
Well, I like unsolved murders, not the ones that are up to date, because I'm like, I want those people to be caught. But
yes.
If they're old, I kind of like them because then I'm trying to think, who do I think really did this?
Right.
Okay.
So you can help me decide who you think it is.
So does there need to be a warning then, a graphic warning?
Maybe. Before I describe a few things, then I'll give a little warning. This is the Germond family murders. We are going to Stanfordville, New York, which is about 100 miles north of New York City. But as different as it is from New York City, it might as well be on another planet. I mean, it is this beautiful, picturesque little town. This small community. It's like, rolling hills and farmland about as far as the eye can see. There was a lot of dairy farming that went on there.
Okay.
And so, it was just and it still is, very beautiful. Now, in 1930, when this case took place, Stanfordville had 1,269 people living there. And now it only has 3,688. So it's a small community.
Still fairly small, yeah.
Mm-hmm. In 1930, we know that the Great Depression was well underway and it had hit, I think, everybody pretty hard. Money was tight, so there was no extra money for things like farm equipment, upkeeping, and things like that. You kind of had to be your own mechanic. And anything that wasn't really necessary had to be cut out. But there were advantages to farming. There was the ability to grow most of your own food. And also, there was always fresh milk. The Germonds, they did okay. They weren't wealthy by any means. They were only milking about 12 cows. But they did have like an electric milking machine. And I'm sure that wasn't cheap.
Right.
For 1930. Now, they didn't have electricity in the house. They had an outhouse.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and they used, they still use lanterns and stuff like that. But yeah, they did have that milking machine. The day before Thanksgiving that year, 1930, had been a really cold day, as is usual that time of year in that part of the country. By 4 p.m., it was only 22 degrees.
Ooh, that's chilly.
Right. And the sun set at 4:30.
Ugh.
There was no electricity, like I had mentioned, just old wood stoves for cooking and warming up the house. And if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to go to the outhouse.
Ugh.
That just reminds me of how blessed we are by our modern conveniences. But I read in a book about this case, the author wrote that the outhouses were 10 yards too far in the winter and about 10 yards too close in the summer.
Oh, I can imagine.
Dairy farmers there in Stanfordville sold their milk products to the local Borden Creamery.
Oh, Borden's.
Yes, Borden's. And they are actually distant relatives of Lizzie Borden.
Oh, you're kidding.
No.
I have never heard that.
I had not either until today. So,
wow.
Yeah, really interesting. It was an odd thing on Thanksgiving morning, November 27th, when Husted, Germond, didn't deliver his milk to Borden. He always showed up to deliver his milk, even holidays. He just did not take days off. But everybody thought, well, good for him. He's taking a day off. But the next morning when he didn't show up again, they started to wonder if he might be sick or just, what was going on. So they asked one of their employees, a friend of Husted's named Willard Coons, to drive out to the farm and just find out what's going on. He got to the farm at around 9 a.m. and noticed it was just eerily still out there. Now, there were all these cows bellowing, they were kind of going crazy, but there was, nobody out working. It just didn't look or feel right.
Yeah, that sounds eerie.
He starts walking up to the barn and he hears the humming of the milking machines still going. But the cows were in desperate need of milking. I guess they were gorged, and being a dairy farmer, he, knew what that looked like. And in fact, he saw that one of the cows had a milker still attached to it. And that was
that would be weird.
So Mr. Coons, he's hollering out, "Hey, is anybody here?" And nobody's answering. So he walked in the barn and didn't see anything. And then he noticed that the wagon shed was slightly opened. And so he walked in, and I'll give you a little warning here. I don't say much at this point, but he, when he opened that wagon shed, he spotted the bloodied bodies of 47-year-old Husted and his 10-year-old son, Raymond.
Ugh.
He did not go any further. He was just terrified and in shock, and he ran back to his car and drove down the road to Husted's brother Paul's farm and told him what he had seen and to please get some help out there. Paul's in disbelief. He's like, "Well, what about, his sister-in-law and his niece?"
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Coons was like, "I don't know." He hadn't even thought about it. And if he had thought about it, he still probably wouldn't have checked because he was scared. You don't ever know if the murderer's still there.
Right. That's what I would be thinking.
Paul, his father-in-law, and the neighbor, Mr. Curry, got over there as fast as they could. And Mr. Coons went back to the Borden dairy to let everybody know, what was going on. They get there and they're, frantically beating on the door as loud as they can, hollering for Mabel, but there's no answer. And they decided not to wait on the sheriff, and Paul's father-in-law walked inside first. He just turned around and looked at Paul and said, "My God, they've all been killed."
Oh, goodness.
They found the body of 47-year-old Mabel Germond on the floor, face down in the kitchen near the back door that led to the farmyard. They also found the body of 18-year-old Bernice, the Germond's oldest daughter, and she was hemmed up under the table and backed into a corner. Aww. They could tell that she had tried to run and just got stuck. And they said that she had a look of just sheer terror still on her face.
Oh, that's horrific.
There was blood all over the place. The mother and daughter had been slashed on their faces, stabbed all over their bodies. Both of their fingers had severe cuts all the way down to the bone from where they had presumably, tried to grab the knife and keep from getting killed. Mabel had kicked. She was actually being held while being stabbed, the wife, and she kicked. So she had cuts on her feet and everywhere else. But it was just a terrible scene. We've talked about in the Crystal Todd case about how much blood comes from a stabbing.
Yes.
It was just a brutal, bloody scene. But because of how cold it was, the puddles of blood were frozen solid.
Oh, wow.
I can't imagine as a brother what that had just, I don't know, the feeling you had to have. And even as a solemn man, that would just be so hard.
Yeah.
They walked down to the cow barn, into the wagon shed, and it was clear that Husted and little Raymond had also been stabbed to death. There were pools of frozen blood all around their bodies. Little Raymond had clearly tried to run and hide, but he had been caught. Husted also had a large, horrible wound on the top of his head as if he'd been hit by something. One of his pockets had been turned inside out, and his wallet was missing, along with somewhere between $80 and $90.
Yeah, that just sounds too brutal to be a robbery, though. And doesn't it seem like an awful lot of these cases that we do, there's just like, a little bit of something taken, but there's a horrible, brutal crime.
Right.
And it's like so many people try to make it look like a robbery. And I'm like, you would think they would realize that doesn't really work.
Right. Well, for one thing, his silver change was kind of strewn all about. So they didn't even take that.
Yeah.
And I feel like in the Depression, you're going to take that silver change.
Absolutely. Although I'm sitting here making assumptions. If you come up later and tell me it's a robbery.
Yeah. But yeah. And then also, he's got his watch, his pocket watch.
Oh, and it's not taken.
And it's not taken.
Yeah.
Husted's autopsy had been, lost to time. But the three others showed that they had fought with everything they had for their lives. These attacks were rage-filled.
It just makes it that more sad, just thinking of those kids.
It wasn't frenzied. In other words, it wasn't like there were 40 stabs to each body. It was deep. There were some superficial wounds, mostly because I think when they were trying to run, like the little boy, it was kind of like trying to stab at a moving target. And then they were all stabbed in the heart.
Wow.
So there were 4 to 7 stab wounds on their bodies along with, these superficial slashes. But the full-on stabs were deep and forceful. Some penetrating, through that sternum bone, which is extremely hard. Mm-hmm. And there were a total of 23 knife wounds between the 4 of them. Mm. And authorities are at a loss. Yeah. They just, by all accounts, the Germonds, they're well-liked. They're well-respected. They were members of the Stanfordville Village Church. They didn't have any known enemies. They weren't wealthy by any means, like I said. Like I had mentioned before, they're only milking 12 cows at the time of the murder. They were able to get by, but it just doesn't seem like somebody would go there to rob. Do you know what I mean?
Like they would pick somewhere where they're likely to get more.
Right. Another fact is that they took his wallet, but inside the house, there was $20 laying out in plain sight. There was Mabel's purse that was untouched. There was also Liberty bonds that weren't. So it wasn't like the house was rifled through.
Yeah, ransacked or anything like that.
So you would think if somebody was coming there with the intent of robbery, that would have been the case. They were able to send their 18-year-old daughter, Bernice, to Eastman Business College in Poughkeepsie, where she studied shorthand, typing, filing, duplicating, and bookkeeping. And I wondered how they could afford that tuition because, I just knew their financial constraints and how, frugal they were. But I learned that while Eastman had been one of the largest commercial schools in the United States, the Great Depression had caused attendance to suffer so much that the Poughkeepsie campus had almost been abandoned by 1930. Oh. And that's when she attended, and that may be why she was able, to attend. The year after her death in 1931, that campus actually closed completely.
Okay. So their numbers just dwindled down and they couldn't stay open.
Exactly. Okay. Because of the Depression. I mean, people just didn't have money. It didn't seem likely that someone, like I said, would choose to rob them. Investigators were looking extensively for clues. They didn't find much, but they did find on the table a large glove that had bloodstains on it. But they weren't able to find the murder weapon. I don't know. There wasn't much of a disturbance besides in the kitchen.
Yeah. I wonder who would have left the glove behind.
I know, like right there on the kitchen table with blood all over it.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
I mean, obviously they didn't have to worry about DNA or anything at that point, but still you would think.
Yeah.
I guess you probably couldn't get fingerprints off of a glove.
Yeah.
And if DNA wasn't really a thing, I guess it wouldn't really matter.
And I'm sure you couldn't get it off of a glove at that time. Like many other crime scenes in those days, everybody and their brothers are traipsing through it.
Always.
Gawkers, newspaper reporters, sheriffs, police, just totally messing up the crime scene, pretty much.
Like, that seemed to happen all the time. I wonder when they got wise to that. Like, hey.
I think some were, because you read about some and you're like, oh, that was really smart.
Yeah.
But then others, it's like, what the heck are you thinking? I mean, they really botched this investigation. I think this is a small town and they just weren't homicide investigators, you know? So, and this is the biggest news that this town has ever seen. They didn't have a murder weapon until 3 days later, when a taxi driver finds Mr. Germond's empty wallet and a long butcher knife with an 8-inch blade that had been thrown in a culvert about 75 feet from their farm. The 45-cent price mark was still written in pencil and was still legible on the knife's handle. The blade had been wiped clean of any blood or fingerprints, but this was, I guess, the first piece of real solid evidence that they had, because they were able to trace it back to the Poughkeepsie hardware store.
Okay.
Yeah, and the knife had actually just been bought a few days before the murders, which is interesting.
That sounds like a good lead.
Yeah. And the store had only sold 6 of these knives.
A really good lead.
Right. But when the clerk was interviewed, he said that he didn't feel like he would be able to identify anyone, even if they were brought in.
What?
Yes. And they didn't bring anybody in. I'm like, are y'all slow?
Yeah, like, that's crazy.
Yes.
And they should have still made him at least go and look at it.
Exactly. Because they had so many different suspects. A lot of them, they weren't good suspects, but I think just everybody is a suspect in those cases. Paul, Huss's brother, was questioned, and he said that he didn't know anybody that would want to hurt his brother, much less the whole family. He said that it looked like somebody went in there and just lost control. The town wondered if the attack was actually meant for Paul instead, like maybe he had been involved in a crime organization or something, but there was no real evidence, that was true. Now, there were a lot of moonshine stills around those parts, and so if that could have something to do with it, Paul himself, I read an interview, and they were like, could it have been for you? And he was like, it could have been, but I can't think of why. There were rumors of a large life insurance policy, but the policies that he had, they totaled about $966. That's not enough to take out a whole family. The insurance payouts that weren't used for funeral expenses, they went to Husted's mother, Mrs. Alice Germond, who also inherited his estate, which was worth about $4,000.
Okay, so no motive there, really.
No.
Either.
Now, when she died, I don't know if the brother inherited that, and she died about a year or two later.
Yeah, it still sounds a little bit like a roundabout way to get an inheritance. Because
seriously,
certainly he didn't know when she was going to die, unless unless he killed her too, which doesn't sound like he did. So
there's only one thing about him that sounds fishy to me, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute. So several neighbors, schoolmates, teachers, friends, a bus driver, bus passengers, family, storekeepers, so many people are, called on to testify in the inquest. And they also opened it to newspaper men, or whatever you want to call them.
Reporters.
Reporters, yes. They made them leave, like, when certain witnesses were being questioned, just, not to damage the integrity of the investigation, as if it had not already been damaged. Investigators were able to piece together the Germond's last day. So Husted and his little buddy Raymond, they had gone down to the Borden Creamery and picked up a check for $200 for payment for his milk. He stopped throughout town and paid his feed bill and some other debts. He also made a couple of necessary purchases. When all that was said and done, he had less than $100. Husted also stopped off at his brother Paul's for a while, and according to Paul's testimony, told him, he said the best he could remember, his brother, Husted, told him that they were going to have Thanksgiving dinner with Mabel's family. When they said goodbye to each other, Husted went home with Raymond, and they started to work on their chores. The father and son were milking cows when they had been murdered. It's believed they were killed outside. So there's two theories. Okay. So, that machine's going on down there. They believe that Husted and whoever may have gotten in an argument because he had that wound on his head and he was hit first. Okay. And then the little boy starts running for help. When he runs, he gets caught, he gets stabbed, and then they're drug inside to the wagon shed.
Okay.
And then they had to kill Mabel because she was a witness. That doesn't make much sense to me because they didn't have to kill the daughter because she wasn't even there.
But I do want to clarify when you say the daughter wasn't there.
I'm going to explain that.
Because she was found in the kitchen.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes. They know that Mabel had been preparing for Thanksgiving that day because food was laid out, ready to be cooked, and some already had been cooked. Mm. And Bernice had been in Poughkeepsie at the business school, but she was being brought home by a bus that evening at 5:30 p.m. The bus actually brought her and dropped her off right at the front of her house. And she looked at the driver and made a remark that her family must be out because all the lights were turned off.
And it was dark because you said it got dark at 4:30.
And it was dark at 4:30, so it would have already been dark.
So that means the killer was already in there waiting for her.
Yes.
Oh, I don't like that.
Yes.
Oh,
so her family was already dead.
Yeah, and they could have already left, but they didn't. Mm-hmm. They were waiting for her. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's scary.
Did she just come in there and they not know she was going to be there, or were they waiting for her?
I feel like they were waiting for her.
I do too.
Oh.
Because the lights were off.
Right.
So I think the lights were off so that she would not see them.
I do too.
And so that the bus wouldn't see them because I'll be able to show you the road. It's right there.
Is it kind of like close like yours?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. The other theory is that somebody knocked on the door and Mabel knew this person. So she opened the door to them and she was murdered first. They wouldn't have heard her crying or screaming because of the milk machines out there. And so then they went out and killed them and then came back to kill Bernice.
Yeah, I don't think that one works.
Yeah. Some thought that Bernice was already home. I do not believe she was home when the family was killed.
She made the comment to the bus driver that the lights were off.
Yes.
That's just too fishy. I feel like that's a key right there.
I do. I definitely do too.
For the timeline.
Right. The police, they had all these witnesses coming forward. After a crime, you're like, well, this person was acting suspicious.
Oh, yeah.
And this person, so you don't mean to, but you really read into everything.
Everything seems suspicious after the fact.
It does. And there had been a stranger who had been seen walking near the Germond farm around the time of the murders.
By whom?
By passerbyers. That was confirmed. So Oakley Robinson, who was a storekeeper of Clinton Corners, which is a few miles from Stanfordville, it would have been about an hour walk, something like that. He had a pretty promising clue because these witnesses saying that they saw this person walking down the road. Well, he described the same person. He said the stranger had appeared at his store at around 8 p.m. on that night, November 26th, and inquired about the bus to Poughkeepsie. The man seemed really nervous. He was anxious. When he was in there, he purchased a soda and a cheap wristwatch. He paid for the soda with a $1 bill and the wristwatch with a $10 bill. And then these two men, Robinson and Edward, the stranger, had said that he had gotten a telegram that his mother was dying and he really needed a ride to the Poughkeepsie train station. And so they agreed that they would take him. He said that he worked at the Borden Creamery. He also said that he knew people who did actually live there. He was saying, yeah, I'm friends with this person and I'm friends with that person, which later they found out was not true, nor did he work at the Borden Creamery. They said that the stranger acted so weird. One of the guys said he kept his hand on a crank handle all the way to Poughkeepsie because he thought he might have to knock him out.
Okay, that is definitely worth noting.
this same suspect came up over and over again. He is a pretty good suspect. So they end up arresting him in New York and, bringing him back. This guy's name was Florentine Bosco, and he was actually a Spanish road worker, and he did work by the Germond farm. He was not the killer. It seems like he actually gave that sob story so that he could get a ride to the train station. He stayed in the area, and everywhere he moved around the area, within an hour or so. But they're like, every time he moved, he would call them and be like, hey, I'm moving. He actually kind of became friends with the detective. He just really wanted them to know,
to clear his
I'm
name.
not the killer. Yeah.
Like, just to be on the safe side, just letting you know I'm not running. I'm moving somewhere else.
Yes.
And this is where I'll be. Does add a little bit of credibility there.
Yeah. First of all, I think one reason, they said they were really nervous about him. He was a foreigner. And back then, there was a stigma attached to that.
And did you say he was Italian?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think during the 30s, there was a lot of racism toward Italians.
Right.
Yeah, during the Depression.
I read 3 different nationalities. I read Italian, I read Hungarian, and I read Spanish. So I do not know. I just know that he was a foreigner.
Well, either way, I think if you were a foreigner of any, there probably was some distrust built into that.
And he did spend some time in jail because at this time, if you're a witness, they can put you in jail.
What?
And they did.
Wait, huh?
Yes. There was maybe 2 other people that they also kept in jail.
Seriously?
Yes. So
doesn't that make you grateful we live in the times that we live in?
Yeah, especially he's cleared and he doesn't even seem like he's mad. I would have been mad.
Yeah.
If I would have spent time in jail and, I didn't do anything.
Or maybe he's guilty and he's just glad he got out. I don't know.
Yeah, true. Maybe he's like, new lease on life. And 2, another reason I don't think the other guy is a good suspect is because there would have been a lot of blood.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if he's walking down the road, right after committing the murder.
Somebody would have seen that.
Yeah. And where is he going to wash?
Well, he may have stayed in the house and cleaned himself up.
I mean, true.
If everybody's dead.
Yeah, that's true.
But he would have had to change clothes.
Yeah. And they didn't find any bloody clothes or anything like that.
Yeah.
So he's a good suspect, but not a good suspect at the same time.
But it is an awfully coincidental that he, on the very day that he was there. So I'm not marking him off my list yet.
Yeah. And I don't want you to. So the only thing about Paul that I find suspicious is Thanksgiving. You hadn't heard from your brother in 2 days. Your neighbors. Isn't that weird?
Well, I mean, it may just be that because it was Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
They were busy at their farm and they're busy at their farm and they see each other all the time. So, and he's already told them they're going to Mabel's family.
Maybe, he says.
Oh.
He says, I think he told me that. Which that's weird to me.
Well, that is a little weird. But then again, he wasn't. If you're having that conversation and nothing suspicious is going on, you may not really listen to it that closely. And now later you're thinking, I think that's what he said. I don't know. I don't find that suspicious.
And I don't think he did it. I mean, he was definitely cleared as a suspect. And so he may have even had an alibi. I don't know why he was cleared, but I think more so they suspected that it could have been a case of mistaken identity and got the 2 of them mixed up.
Perhaps.
Yeah. So another guy, he came forward and literally lied and said he saw the murders.
Dummy.
Well, he had a really low IQ of 70 something. I think it was a 75 IQ. And he was a peeping Tom. And I guess it was known around town or whatever. And so this other guy came to him and was like, if you don't tell what you saw, you're going. I think he told him he was going to get the death penalty. And he's like, okay, I saw, and so then he just starts kind of lying. He does come forward and say, and admit that he was lying.
Did he get cleared?
He did. He was cleared.
I don't know. I think he sounds a little suspicious.
I mean, he does, but it wasn't like he was forthcoming about it. Somebody literally went to him and was like, I know you saw something.
Okay. And maybe just because he was a little slow, convinced him that he was going to get in trouble if he didn't say something. And they asked him,
they're like, why did you say that if it wasn't true? And he was like, because he said I was going to go. He get the chair or whatever. So.
Okay.
And he was kind of young. I want to say he was only 16, 17. I mean, so peeping Tom, you can use that word lightly. He might have not have been a total pervert. He could have just been a weird teenage boy trying to catch a peep. Not that that's okay, but that sounded really weird. But I just said I'll probably take that out.
No, leave it in. Leave it in.
Oh, gosh. Okay. So
That's funny.
in December, on a bitterly cold day, the Germond family is laid to rest. All 4 of them. How terrible. And the investigators, they're doing all they can, continuing to try to chase down tips that are going nowhere. Years pass. People are, being accused of murder. They're being put in jail. But there's really just no viable suspects. 1932, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt is actually running for president. He is governor of New York. Well, he is actually from the same county where these murders take place.
How about that?
And so a lot of prominent local citizens who are very upset that this crime has not been solved, they go to him and they're like, we need this solved.
Yeah.
And of course, he wants the support.
Sure.
So, I mean, and he could have been genuinely interested. I don't know. But I know that he ordered the state's attorney general to take over the investigation.
Oh, so now it's going to get a big boost. Okay.
There was a Republican, John R. Schwartz. He was also running for re-election for the DA.
Okay.
And he's like, this is totally a political move. They said that Roosevelt was meddling and it was just merely to get votes.
Well, anytime you have a crime of that nature in a political season, you do have to wonder.
Right, of course.
But I will say this. You've already said that was a very rural area.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even if he's getting the support of those people from his home county or whatever, that's still not that many votes.
Right.
So I feel like he probably did have some interest in getting it solved. But probably, if nothing else, he knew people that were, that knew him. Right.
I wish I had more background on this family, but I could not find it. But apparently they were really well loved.
Okay.
And so, yeah, they really genuinely wanted this case solved. I mean, I guess we all would if we had a local murder, but yeah. So anyway, it wasn't until February of 1933, almost 3 years after the murder, that Sheriff Oakley Cookingham, he made a case against the Germond's neighbor. The neighbor was Arthur Curry, and he was actually the one who went into the house with Paul and his father-in-law when they discovered Mabel and Bernice. He was 46 years old. He had a violent history. He'd actually spent time in Sing Sing for an assault.
So that's sounding good for Mr. Curry.
Yeah. Cookingham totally believed that he was the murderer. I mean, this guy has an explosive temper. So yeah, Mr. Curry, he's a chicken farmer, he's a barber, a roadhouse operator, and a small town bootlegger. So the investigators had learned that there was a little bit of beef between those two.
Okay, still not sounding good for Mr. Curry now at all.
No, because Mr. Curry believed that Husted owed him money. At 4 p.m. on that day, he had told his wife that he was going over to see Husted about getting the money that he was owed. So there's that. During questioning, because he was questioned just like everybody else was, and he had told investigators and had his wife tell investigators that he had gotten home by 5:45. But he was not home by 5:45. He did not get home until 6:35.
Okay.
And that was within the time frame.
That's 3 marks against him. I already think he's guilty.
That would have been actually the perfect time because it gives him still an hour after Bernice gets there.
Yep.
When he came home, he told his wife that he'd seen Husted, but he hadn't been able to get the money that he was owed. So he also had somebody at his house that was waiting on him. He was going to cut his hair. And so I don't know if this was a calculated move on his part or what, but after they found the bodies, he was like, yeah, me and you couldn't have done it because, I was cutting your hair. And the guy's like, Well,
Yeah.
Cookingham, he actually charged him with murder on March 9th, 1933. The defense lawyers are like, there's literally no evidence. How do you think you were going to convict him? And at a hearing that was held in Poughkeepsie on April 3rd, Cookingham, he's trying to make his case and he's saying, I believe that he killed this family. They were arguing over that money that was owed and also over hunting rights to this land that Husted rents from Curry, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That he paid for to hunt on. Well, Curry is wanting to rent it out to others to hunt on. And he's like, no,
yeah,
I paid for
apply.
that.
Right. Yeah.
And so apparently that was a big thing.
Yeah.
And this sheriff believed that it turned into a big fight.
Yeah.
That Curry lost control and killed the family.
It does sound a little brutal that he would go in and kill the wife and then the daughter.
Over that. And the wife's murder to me seemed particularly harsh.
But we don't know what kind of words they may have had in the past. And even if he kills that guy over a disagreement, if he still has paperwork where he has paid for the rights to that land, it might not would fix the problem. Like he would still be beholden to that family for the land.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to think of all possible motives.
Yeah, Husted, he had actually refused to even let him hunt on that land that he was leasing from him. And that led, they believed it led to a big fight. The investigation shows that the murders, they believe, were an act of like a quick-tempered person after some rage-filled, incident. The judge, though, he said that there was no way that there just was not enough evidence.
Yeah.
And he ordered that they release Curry and dismiss the charges. And he told the sheriff that the case was just made up of too much suspicion and too little evidence.
Well, unfortunately, that is true.
By this time, Roosevelt, he's been elected president. His interest in the case had kind of waned.
Oh.
In the media as well. I mean, you have to think the Depression is in full swing.
Mm-hmm.
There are just big issues in the country.
Yeah. He's got bigger fish to fry now.
Right. And so in 1955, Curry died. Whatever he knew, he took to the grave. And so the case is actually unsolved to this very day.
Wow.
Yeah. So tell me what your thoughts are.
Well, I think Curry's guilty.
I feel like it's all over the place. I think he's the best suspect.
Yeah. At first, I was thinking that the stranger, that was just a little bit too convenient. But when you told about Curry, I agree that there's not enough evidence to convict him.
Right.
I mean, you can't just convict somebody because they've had a bad temper and been to prison for whatever. Unfortunately, I do think he did it, though.
I do too, but I'm like,
well,
that's a lot of overkill.
Well, who else
for the kids? Like, why are you going to kill the kids because the dad won't hunt? I don't know. Unless he's just a violent, mean person and enjoys killing.
Well, or just was mad enough that he just, when he snapped, thought, well, I'll take you all out. I mean, once he snapped and they're all there. Well, the little boy, he would have had to kill him because he saw it.
Yeah, and not only that, but the wife was found. Okay, so where she was found in the kitchen, but it was at that door that would have opened to go out.
Yes,
basically where the pasture and stuff would have been. And so I wonder if she didn't walk out there and see something, and
she may have.
He knew. And also, they were very close neighbors. He would have been the only person to know exactly what time Bernice came in every day.
Even the brother wouldn't have?
Right. I mean, he maybe would have, but they were saying that this guy is close enough, his house is close enough.
That he knows their pattern.
That he can actually, see the bus coming in. You know what I mean? Where the brother may or may not have paid attention, and he wasn't close enough to see it.
Right. Okay, so also I think, honestly, if you have to look at motive, and he's really the only one that has a good motive.
Yeah, he is.
If they were squabbling over the land and this perceived money that he felt like he was owed.
Oh, and okay. So to me, this is what made him look guilty. So everybody, when they're talking about Bernice, she is, even people that like rode the bus with her, people at her school, she was just very quiet.
Okay.
She wasn't super social.
Okay.
Just not super outgoing. A really nice person. She's not going to go sit on the bus and just chit chat. You know what I mean? A little bit reserved. She wasn't really interested in boys. And if she was interested in boys, she wasn't really talking about it. She had one cousin who was like her best friend, and they wrote letters back and forth. And she talked one time about her and this boy going out on like a rowboat ride, you know, because that's what they did back then. And she was like, you might like him, but I don't. When they interviewed Curry, the neighbor, he says that Bernice had told him that she had a boyfriend that she'd hoped to land over at that business school. This is a quote from him. So actually, that was the running theory for a long time. Because, yeah, they like totally drug her through the mud until people came to her defense and is like, she is not like that. But this one investigator said there was something that came up in the autopsy that he would not say because it wasn't pertinent to the case. And so I wondered if that meant that she was not a virgin. And I actually wondered if she was not sexually assaulted.
I did wonder earlier, but you didn't mention it, so I assumed that she wasn't.
Yeah. If he had a thing for the daughter.
So here's a theory. Well, two things. One is, it would have been really, really good for somebody to have found out if he bought a knife at that store.
Yes.
In the days prior to that.
Right.
So when you're talking about them being inept, I'm like, good gracious. So this is my theory. I think Curry did know their schedule. I think he went over there and got into a heated argument and probably conked that guy on the head and then ended up killing him. Of course, the little boy did see it, so now he had to kill him as well. And at some point, maybe there was a lot of screaming.
Right.
If he's killing the dad, the little boy might be screaming, and maybe the mama comes out the door to see what's going on. Well, now
they believe he was screaming.
Okay, so now he's got to kill the mama too, because maybe she heard that and she came out and she saw him there.
Right.
So now he's got to kill her. So he's in the house. Maybe he's trying to clean up.
Yeah.
And it's time for that girl to get off the bus, and so he just turns off the lights and waits, and then takes her out when she comes in. And then, goes home and cleans himself up and waits for somebody to discover the bodies.
Yeah. Now, whoever did it probably did clean up there, because when he came home, he didn't have...
And those bloody gloves were left.
Yeah.
And as far as we know, he didn't have anything. His wife could have lied for him.
Yeah. And that murder weapon was found very close to the farm.
Yeah. And then, of course, you're going to think, well, now I got to make this look like something else.
Yeah,
so I'm going to steal this wallet.
Yeah, they even said that pulling out the pocket inside out, that's usually a tactic.
Yeah. It's kind of like a too obvious.
Right, exactly. At first, I thought that there may have been maybe at least two people to commit the murders, because I was like, how is one person going to take out this whole family? But that theory that you just brought forth, that's kind of what I thought too. I believe that whoever did that knew was coming home.
Yeah.
And they were waiting for her.
Yeah. And it could just be, if it was him, maybe he just didn't get everything done and cleaned up in time before she was due to arrive. So he just like, well, you're going too.
Right.
Who knows?
Right. And then sadly, the family spent all Thanksgiving Day laying dead.
Oh, that's horrible.
On their farm while their community is celebrating. They didn't get discovered until the next day. And investigators had even said they believe if they had found them earlier, like maybe the day before, they believed it could have been solved, because they said that the person, they just had time to clean up or, do whatever needed to be done.
Yeah.
The whole thing is interesting and so sad, because it's probably never going to be solved.
No, it won't be. Well, those were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
After my wife heard my comments last time about having options, she said I was right. I had the option to sleep on the little couch or the big couch. I'm thinking about maybe telling her off. I probably won't, but just in case, you better keep listening to every episode of Hard Times and True Crimes. That way you'll be the first to know. And you make sure you tell everybody you know, and a few people you don't, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.